And we're set. Yeah,
Okay,
hello, hi
good evening.
everybody. Hello, welcome on our 12th, right? It's 12th meetup.
12th,
12th
yes.
meetup with our initiative Agile with Ukraine, and we are glad to see you here. Today we have two wonderful guests. We have Simon and Jessa. Simon and Jessa, professional Scrum trainers, and also they are stewards of the Scale Professional Scrum course. In my humble opinion, it's one of the best courses we have at scrum.org. It's about scaling Scrum. It's about Nexus framework. And today you guys have pretty nice stuff prepared for us. And we're going to talk about scaling today. Yeah, but before we start, we'd like to share some information.
I want to add that
Yeah.
I was really waiting for this topic as certified less coach. So I'm totally inspired with the topic and want to know more, because we are so often try to compare, and someone in internet even try to compete, but I believe that we are working in the same direction to help organizations to deliver more value.
So you see, we were on the call before the meetup and Artem didn't mention it.
I was waiting.
Yeah.
I was waiting.
The
Yeah,
little
exactly.
add-on was nice. Otherwise, it probably would have muted you for the rest of the meetup. So
No, okay. He cannot. He cannot. It's my Zoom account.
Yeah.
So please
Okay.
be polite towards less framework. Okay, let's start. I will
Okay.
tell you just a few words about our initiative and how it was created. So let me to share the screen. It will be not so funny, unfortunately, but that's what we are, where we are. So we call this initiative Agile with Ukraine, and it was created for people who like to learn something new, to continuously develop their skills and knowledge and expertise, and they prefer to learn from the best experts in their domain, and that's why we are inviting the best Agile speakers around the globe to share what they want and have in their experience. And also we want to, with these meetups, we want to help Ukraine, because connecting people, creating network, and providing learning events is what we did before the war started. I'm from Ukraine and I'm living in Ukraine right now. I'm originally from Kiev, but I wasn't need to leave Kiev because of this. Neighbors, we have a great country, but with very strange neighbors, so to say. And Andrei is a Ukrainian guy who is living in Poland, and we have a call with each other and decide that we need somehow to contribute, because we are not the most promising soldiers in the region, and that's how we are trying to help our country right now. So thank you for being with us here this evening. And I want to share with you a bit of nowadays reality in Ukraine, because different media around the globe shows what they prefer to show, and we want to share with you what is really happening. On the top you can see the biggest square in Europe. It's Kharkiv. It's a city with more than 1 million population, and yeah, it's not looks like military object to send some missiles or rockets or bombs there. On the left bottom you can see Chernigiv. On the right bottom you can see Sumy. Chernigiv is a city which was situated, built even before Moscow, just for people who don't know a lot of Ukrainian history. It was a part of Kiev Rus before word and name Moscow appeared. But they said that Ukraine never existed before Soviet Union. It's very strange for people who really learn history in the school. But no, not everyone visiting school, maybe. And few more pictures. It's Faculty of Economics, Karazin Kharkiv National University, before and after invasion. Also not very military object. This is Kiev city, almost city center, 7 kilometers from city center. Absolutely civilian building with people inside, because it was 26th of February, I believe. So just the beginning of the war. This is the world's largest transport aircraft, Mria. It was ruined, absolutely. And it was only one copy, I believe, in the world. And they were building the second by contract, but it will be postponed, this release. This is a new shopping mall, just 500 meters from the new flat which I just bought for my grandma. And thanks God that we've, with parents together, pushed her out from this flat 2 days before the bombs. So she wasn't there, and she now feels safe in Germany. and flat is also okay, but other flats nearby is not so okay, as you can see. It's just a shopping mall with a big swimming pool and business center in this high building. Kyiv also. This is a new business center which was opened just last winter, I believe, near Lukyanevska Street. It's also 5 kilometers from Krещатик and Maidan Незалежності, from city center, before and after. This is Chernigiv new residential building with civilian people before and after. This is Bucha. I believe that you've probably heard something about. We don't want to put a lot of harsh pictures here in this presentation, but you can find them by this hashtag. And this is Bucha by vision of Yandex. Yandex, for those who don't know, it's Russian Google. So Russian people usually use Yandex. It's the most popular search engine. It was built as a default in Opera browser for many years. So this is nowadays what they show when you ask to show pictures. Yandex comparing to Google. It really shows the different realities of different countries and people, what they believe in, you know. And this is Zakhar. He is 11 years old. He is from Bucha originally, and since God, he, with his family, was lived Bucha just in time, 2 days after war started, and he have seen how the Mriya airplane was ruined, and he drawn this picture because another project I'm working on with my wife is UA Kids Today. It's an online gallery for children around the Ukraine, and they are drawing what they've seen, what is inside their heads, so they can somehow switch thinking and offload it from the minds. Настя, малой в ведре. Sorry, I have a child here. So yeah, if you're interested to see more, you can find UA Kids Today Instagram. And this is Dobro Park. It's one more, almost last personal story from my side. We've been there with my family at the end of January. It's big open-air park with nice flowers. As you can see, some statues to take nice photos. And this is my daughter looking at the residence of Santa Claus. So it was at the end of the January. And what they did to this place. It's also 15 kilometers from my house, nearby Kyiv. So 25 kilometers from Kyiv. Just in the village, so no military objects around. Just nearby highway. So they've stayed there and after they ruined it. And for those who are from Europe, Ukraine is not somewhere on another planet. We are neighbors also with some of you. So Kyiv, for example, is just 1,000 kilometers from most of the Western European cities. And we've traveled a lot before the war, and I believe that after the win, we can invite you also to visit our cities and show you that this is very nice European country with very open people who will definitely show you everything, feed you with nice food, and give you some nice drinks, and our smiles and openness of our hearts. And now we're also collaborating with Uniters Foundation, and Andrei can tell you more because he's there just nearby these people who are helping Ukraine from the 2014.
Yeah, so most of you know that the large-scale war started on 24th of February, but the war in Ukraine has started in 2014 from the annexion of Crimea and also the aggression of Russia in Donbas region. And those events happened right after Maidan, right after our revolution, where we stood up for our government who wanted to do illegal acts towards the overall direction of development of Ukraine. So we had a revolution. During the revolution, there were more than 100 men and women killed during that revolution, and we impeached our president. And after that, Russia invaded Ukraine. And this foundation, which was formerly called the Initiative of Heroes of Maidan, right after the war started, it started supporting Ukrainian people and Ukrainian army in 2014. Mainly, it was founded by people who just wanted to help, and for 8 long years, they were helping Ukraine. During that time, they became real professionals in volunteering, and they became really awesome and effective in providing help. So during those 8 years, the situation descaled and also escalated quite a few times. And they had some other initiatives as well for example, children who lost their fathers. It was called the Children Without Christmas Without a Dad. So they provided education, they provided with vacations for children who lost their fathers. And as soon as the war started, they have put a max speed on to help Ukraine. And just think of the numbers. So the first cargo from Poland to Ukraine from this foundation has left on the 26th of February, 2 days after the war has started. And till 27th of March, so 1 month, they provided more than 3,000 tons of help to Ukraine. It's around 100 tons per day. Just think of that number. And so when the war started, I took a vacation because I couldn't focus on work. And I was cooperating closely with those guys. And on Monday, I started working again, and I started with the course. So I taught a course. And all of my example about continuous integration, continuous deployment were about this foundation, because that's the best CI/CD I've ever seen in my life, with the way how those people are operating. And I asked them, like, what kind of help do they need? They say that they have awesome people, they have great process. What they need is the stable flow of cash coming into foundation to keep helping Ukraine. And this is what we're trying to do also with this initiative. So during the meetup, we're going to ask you to donate. There are a couple of ways how to donate. Artem has already sent you the links to PayPal and to the Polish website. If you feel more comfortable, there are also the credential of bank accounts, and we would be very, very appreciative if you could donate and help Ukraine, because that evil has to be stopped. And it can be only stopped with your help.
And you said it just before we will stop with you. So evil has to be stopped, and we are giving microphone to our speakers, and I will stop sharing.
Exactly.
Thank you for your attention.
Let's go to the fun and valuable part of this evening. So Simon and Jesse, the floor is yours.
Mike is yours.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to start with more links for the next hour or so. That will be the link that we'll be following. And if you find time in between to click on any of the other links and donate, please do so. But we have a mural board prepared. So we'd love you to kind of follow that and see if you can access it. It should work. But if anybody has any problems, let us know. And also screen share. But on the screen share, you can't actually interact with the mural board. So if we ask you to add anything or anything else, make sure that you swap kind of to the browser or to the application that you've got Miro loaded into. So good evening, everybody. My name is Jesse Houwing. I recognize a few names from the NL Scrum meetup. So we cross-posted this event to the NL Scrum meetup as well. So really glad to have you here. So we host that in Amsterdam, and we'll be continuing some of these conversations there as well as we keep hosting the rest of the year. I'm the steward for the Skilled Professional Scrum training together with Simon. I work in the Netherlands as a Scrum consultant and working with DevOps and all kinds of other crazy things. I'm a Microsoft MVP and play a lot with Azure DevOps and GitHub on the tooling and the process side if I'm not tweaking people. So with me tonight, we've got Simon, who is my co-steward at Scrum.org. So we're in this boat together. So I'll pass off to Simon.
In the moment, Simon is a little bit speechless regarding the pictures. So maybe you need to do the talking. Hello, everyone. My name is Simon. I'm from Germany. I'm a co-steward for the SPS class together with Jesse. And besides that, I'm a professional Scrum trainer. And most of the time I'm spending with training and workshops for our clients, with Scaled Scrum mostly, but also in other areas. And I guess that's enough. We should move on. Our idea was to make it as interactive as possible. So hopefully everybody is now on the board. I see at least 11 people so far.
Yeah, the more that we can add, the better.
Yes.
And Andre and Artem join in too.
Yes.
So first, we'd like to kind of explore a little bit around what scaled Scrum is and what it might not be. So I'll bring you all to this board, and just what I'd like you to kind of figure out, bring you all to me, bring everyone here. Oh, I can't do that. You must do that, Simon, because you're the board
I'm taking
owner.
care of it.
What we'd like to explore is the things that you associate with these different 4 quadrants. So you'll see that there's 4 quadrants here, and maybe the one in the lower left corner is the easiest. It's a single team of a product owner, a Scrum Master, and developers working on a single product. So I tend to associate that with Scrum, but there's also a lot of other practices and feelings and emotions and kind of practices that you use and ways to collaborate that you might associate with that. So we'd love you to explore that. If we go up, you have, this is where we have multiple teams working on a single product. And again, you could explore what that means, what it is and what it isn't. There's all kinds of options out there that we could go into. Lower right corner, I have a single team working on multiple products. In my experience, that's usually chaos, but I'd love to hear what you think about it. And then in the upper right corner, in the upper right corner, we've got multiple teams working on multiple products, and that can be kind of a random combination of any of the other 3 quadrants. So maybe there's also things that you associate with that, certain practices, certain feelings, certain either loves or hates with things happening. Maybe also the kinds of enterprises and companies that you associate with that, or the kind of teams that they're working with. So we'd love you to kind of explore that a little bit and start figuring out what that might look like. And does it make sense, Simon, to bring them out in a breakout room so that people can have a quick chat together? I can actually find where my Zoom went. So
Same.
There's meeting controls. Come on.
We can create breakout rooms if you want, guys. Maybe it would be easier because we're not covering the screen.
I'm doing it, no worries. Breakout, I make 3 breakout rooms.
So like
3 breakout rooms
would be nice. You're going to be automatically selected to be joining a breakout room, and so together explore and discuss a little bit the feelings that you might have with these different quadrants. Maybe there are certain practices that you've used. Maybe there are certain clients or companies that you worked at that are in one of these quadrants. So let's just explore that a little bit, and then we'll continue. I'll set a timer on the board, and I'll open up the rooms. The rooms are opening up right now. All right. So the recording only captures kind of the before and the after state so the people watching the recording, this just magically all appeared. We're seeing kind of a lot of keywords. I put a couple of thumbs up or +1s on there. So if you want to, you can do the same thing. If you click on a post-it, you can click on icon, and then there's if you search for +1, you'll find the thumbs up. You can also do a -1 if you disagree. You can,
wow.
A little bit on the ones that you like and don't like, or add any other crazy icon that you want to add there. That's okay too. Interestingly enough, I see Kanban in every place, so I like that. Often we see Kanban only in the lower right corner, where people say you're doing crazy things and all at the same time, so you need Kanban, you can't do Scrum. And say, yeah, well, you could use Kanban practices everywhere. You could also use Scrum in many of these places. What's funny is if you look at it, is kind of looking at it from the perspective of teams working with people and working together on a single goal. The ones on the quadrant on the left kind of have preferences over the one on the quadrants on the right. So if you have to work with multiple teams and multiple products, ideally, those products are then decomposed in groups of teams that can work together on a single product, so that you don't really kind of end up in that lower right corner too much, where people are working on many different products at the same time, and it becomes very difficult to set priority, to help invite the right stakeholders, to have the right kinds of conversations, and just the number of people that are involved in your effort just multiply, not just the number of people inside of your skilled environment, but also the number of people that you have to interact with outside of your skilled environment. So you have to interact with more stakeholders, you have to interact with more customers, you have potentially have to deal with more users. They all have different opinions and thoughts. So the elements on the right usually kind of introduce more chaos, and chaos is usually not what we're after in a complex environment. So we're trying to find simplicity. So where we can create that would be awesome. So we're going to talk about mostly this quadrant. And let me just draw a little big box around it. So this is mostly what we're talking about when we're talking about scaling Scrum. So that's kind of all in there. It is multiple teams working together on a single product. And then you could have combinations of those and kind of create that upper right corner if you do portfolio management, nice. But we're not really talking about Scrum in that area. That just means how much money and resources you allocate, how many people you make available in order to be able to work on those products. So that's not really something where we need to venture into what Scrum looks like in that context, because hopefully if you're just funding whole teams, then we'll just end up with one or more Scrum teams working on your product. Cool. So Simon, you're doing better.
Yeah, I was seeing one sticky note on the last chart in the upper right. It was about dependencies, but I would say not only dependencies. We have not only dependency only here. I would say we have dependencies all over the place here as well.
Yeah, probably more there. So
yes. And now if you go back to the math equation, the thing what we typically see, or the thinking what we are trying to avoid, is that if you add more teams, then you automatically get more value. Like if you add one more team, you double the value. And common sense tells us that's not true. And why is it not true? Because of dependencies. And that's the next thing. So we are looking, if you talk about scaling Scrum and the goal why we would like to scale, then our thinking is that with Nexus or with scaled Scrum in general, we would like scale value as uniform as possible. Okay. So basically, if you add one more team, then you double the value. If you add another team and so on, that's the idea. But in reality, it looks a little bit different. And if you look on the next picture, what we typically see is, that's just an example here, of course. We have one team and then we add another team and so on, and maybe the value increases more or less linearly. But at some point, it will break. Okay. And here we have drawn it before the fourth team, but I guess that's a little bit optimistic from us. So it could happen a little bit earlier as well. And we would like to talk with you today in a very interactive fashion about what can we do in order to get this red line a little bit more up, that it's not so steep. We do not believe that we can uniformly scale value infinite, but it should be a little bit better as here. And we would like to talk about, let's say, 3 general principles here. And the first one is, we would like to talk about a lightweight scaling framework and why it is important. The second one is, why do we need goals? And in particular, what's the benefit of shared goals? And last but not least, we would like to talk a little bit about the rule of 1. So that's the agenda for today. And the first part is the lightweight scaling framework. And there are a lot of frameworks outside. The question is why we emphasize lightweight so much. And there is a general principle behind it. It calls the Akram's razor. when you have two competing theories that make exactly the same prediction, the simpler one is the better one. So if we have two theories on how to scale Scrum, the simpler one is the better one. And why is this the case? We can experiment more easily, okay? The less stuff you add, the faster you get feedback if your theory is working or not. So if we try to scale as lightweight as possible, we get faster feedback if it is working or not, and then we can move on here. So it's a very general science principle, and that's the reason why we believe that you need to scale as lightweight as possible to make experiments as fast as possible. That's the idea behind it.
Yeah, it's also that we have found through many places where we encounter scaled Scrum that none look alike. So everybody ends up with doing their own practices, their own things. Some borrow it from one framework, some borrow it from another, but I've never ever seen any company do everything according to SAFe or everything that LESS prescribes, or it's usually that it becomes some kind of a pick and choose thing. And the more practices that you pick, the harder it becomes to figure out which ones are adding value and which ones are actually just causing more problems than they're trying to solve. So this is really kind of one of those places where if you can find exactly those practices that solve the problems that you actually have, then you can probably get a lot of work done with fewer people.
Yes.
I've seen some statistics about the number of people working on the software, for example, inside of a Tesla, and it's a lot less than the number of people that are working on the software in the Volkswagen ID3. And if I look at it, the Tesla team is going faster, and B is delivering a better piece of software. So and it's not just a few more people; it's like 1,000 times more people that are working on these different products. It's like, whoa, how is that possible? With so many people, how is it not possible to deliver a lot more value? So there's some interesting perspectives there.
And so we would like to explore what we mean by lightweight framework altogether, and we presented you an overview of the Nexus framework. So it's our idea about scaling Scrum in a lightweight fashion. And we would love that you start collecting some questions regarding the elements you see on the board. So do you have some questions regarding the sprint retrospective and so on? Please write them down on a sticky notes, and afterwards we will try to answer as much as possible from your questions and explain a little bit the framework in detail. So we can do it as before with breakout rooms. Jesse, what do you think?
I think that will make it easier to have a little bit of a side conversation, but you'll have to set the board timer because I can't do that.
Oh, okay.
So let me open up the rooms again. So you can have your discussions. Let me give you new people to meet. It's always nice when that happens. And that also gives you an opportunity to talk to each other, which is nice.
Yes. So that the exercises, go into a breakout room with one or more person, introduce yourself, have a look at the Nexus framework, and come up with at least one question which you would like to have answered about the Nexus framework. Write it on a sticky note and place it accordingly. The time box is, what, about 5 minutes?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay.
All right. Opening up.
We hope. Okay, welcome back. We hope you enjoyed your conversation with one or two new friends.
Well, let's quickly walk through the framework. If you look at this picture, you'll probably see that this looks an awful lot like Scrum. So there's a reason for that. The way that this process framework was created by Ken and by Richard Hundhausen and a couple of other professional Scrum trainers was not to see what you could potentially add inside of your organization and which roles you could define, but basically to look at many situations where Scrum was instantiated in a scaled environment, and where they saw kind of the places where Scrum became harder and harder and harder to do. And there they added some strengthening. So we sometimes call this kind of the exoskeleton of Scrum. But a scaled Scrum basically builds on top of Scrum, and it tries to stay as close to Scrum where possible. So if in the Nexus guide, which is the official document that describes Nexus, you can't really figure out what something is supposed to be, then you can basically fall back to the original Scrum guide and figure out, all right, so for example, the length of the events is not described in Nexus, which just means that the standard Scrum time boxes still apply. And we haven't changed any of those, so that's just going to be the case. So let me quickly kind of go through the framework. We assume that in a scaled environment, we're still working on a single product, and that means that we have a single product owner and that we have a single product backlog. So that's the one that you see on the left. But since we're now working with multiple teams on that, you see that there's now a name at the arrow that is refinement. And cross-team refinement is no longer an optional practice. If you do not mind your dependencies, if you're working with multiple teams, then they will bite you in the back during the sprint, and then you probably won't have enough time to resolve on any of the problems that come out of that. So Nexus introduces the concept of cross-team refinement, which is an event that happens somewhere during the sprint. It could happen spread out across the sprint. There isn't really a set time box or time and place that it happens. And the right people attend, or the appropriate people, as we call them in the Nexus guide. So the people who will make the event successful. And that is an interesting, also kind of an interesting thing that we see with all of the Nexus events, is that we as a Nexus need to figure out who the right people are. That's something that we'll experiment on as well. And depending on what you're working on as a team, maybe that changes over time. Maybe if you're focusing very much on savings in a bank, then you've got different people attending than when you start working on a mortgages product. So it could be the same basic teams that are actually doing the work. So that gives us a big backlog with all of the stuff on it. And then as teams, we need to figure out what we can do in a sprint. So sprint planning is, again, one of the events. We call it Nexus Sprint Planning. And in this event, we need to be able to create a sprint backlog for each team, a Nexus sprint backlog for the whole Nexus, a Nexus goal, which is kind of the step where that we want to make as a whole Nexus towards the protocol, and a sprint goal for each team on how they think that they can contribute to that Nexus goal. Now, again, we need to do some part of that probably at scale. So figure out what the most important thing is that we should be working on, what we should be working on, what we shouldn't be working on, and who thinks that they can contribute in which way. But it's probably too large of an event to create all of the individual sprint backlogs. So what then happens is, after we've kind of set the stage and we figured out what we want to do, is that you break that up, and each team starts to plan for themselves. And then maybe they run into a new dependency, or they run into some kind of a new problem, and then they find the right people, again, the appropriate people, bring them back together in the Nexus portion of the Nexus sprint planning, communicate the problem that they might have found, and that is then taken back to the teams to figure out kind of how to solve that. This might happen a couple of times back and forth, but in the end, we should have a good enough plan to get started. We don't have to have a full plan for the whole sprint, but that's not different from Scrum anyway. And each team should have an idea how they're going to contribute to the Nexus sprint goal. So, and then we start the sprint. In the sprint, we've got multiple teams. They all contribute. Each team knows who their Scrum Master is. Each team knows the product owner, because there's just one product owner. You can see multiple product owners drawn in the picture, but it just means that the accountability of product owner is being fulfilled for each team. So we do not have team product owners for each team. There's just a single product owner for the product. Same with Scrum Masters. There are Scrum Masters in the Nexus. Some teams might be sharing Scrum Masters. Some teams might have a dedicated Scrum Master. Scrum doesn't say how that works. Nexus doesn't explain kind of exactly how it works. The appropriate teams have the appropriate Scrum Masters, probably. You'll find a lot of it depends here. And every day these teams meet. And then they meet in the Nexus Daily Scrum again. So we see the question here. So who should attend? Can you imagine if you've got like 90 people in the Nexus, that all 90 people join in a Nexus Daily Scrum, and the first goes, well, I worked on this yesterday, and today I'm going to work on that. That will be a nightmare. So what we need is that from each team, the right people attend. So who are the right people? Those are the people. Usually each team has a person that's kind of their designated representative for the sprint. It might be their team member that's also a member of the Nexus integration team. It might be another person. So those should probably always attend. And if you know that you are working on something that might be causing problems, then it's also nice that you just also attend. So this is basically the right people decide that they should meet. And then we end up with being able to make transparent all of the problems that we have around mostly integration between the teams in the event. This might take like 15 minutes, just like the normal daily Scrum. And now with that information made transparent, all of these representatives of the team take that information back to their teams, and then they can feed that information back into the daily Scrum of the individual teams. So afterwards, got our 15-minute time box, and kind of this order of doing Nexus first and teams later, that kind of solves the problem of you're doing a daily Scrum. You find out, oh, we've got 3 impediments. You take them to the Scrum of Scrums, and you share, we've got 3 impediments. And then other teams also share impediments. And then you come back to your teams and you say, well, that plan that we created like 15 minutes ago, scrap it. We're going to do a new one because we just learned some new information. So we first need to create transparency, then we can create a plan. That's kind of the concept. At the end of the sprint, we have an integrated increment that is kind of at the last possible moment. So we've got our integrated increment right here. We can create, of course, as many integrated increments as we want during the sprint. We can release to production as many times as we want during the sprint. That's the same as in Scrum. But at the end of the sprint, we should be able to compare the last increment that we showed at sprint review and the current increment that we're going to show at sprint review. So we're basically inspecting the delta. We look at that in a Nexus sprint review, which is for the whole product. So all teams attend, and everybody kind of shares what was done on the increment, what was delivered, what was learned, what stakeholders have learned in the market, what people might have seen on conferences, what the product owner has heard from customers, what the service desk has heard from vendors that they're working with. Kind of all of the information is made transparent in that single Nexus sprint review. You can do that in many different ways. I've seen people use open spaces or a World Cafe or more of a science fair approach. I've seen people create all kinds of mini YouTube videos that they shared around and had people watch, and then they met afterwards. Again, Nexus doesn't prescribe how you do it, but we prescribe that you must figure out how to do it. You must figure out how to do it. That's basically what we prescribe. Afterwards, we meet in the Nexus sprint retrospective. Again, this is across all of the teams. We want to make transparent any problems that exist across teams. So in LESS, this is often called like systemic problems. We're looking at the things that influence the whole Nexus and where the whole Nexus could benefit if we solve those kinds of things. So this usually starts again with a Nexus bit. This could be an open space. This could be a huge dot voting session. This could be a liberating structure string. It's up to the facilitator to figure out how to do it. And then afterwards, we feed that information back to smaller groups. So this could be, again, an open space environment, but it could also be the individual team sprint retrospectives where they come up with potential solutions for the problems that were identified. And then basically that work all goes back, that gets identified, potential improvements, goes into the next Nexus sprint planning or on the product backlog, and then we are full circle. The only thing that we haven't talked about is the Nexus integration team. I sometimes jokingly call them the not integration, not team. They do not integrate any work, and they generally don't function as a team. So in a worst case scenario, they might form up as a team and actually start working and create a lane on the Nexus sprint backlog where their work is then shown. But generally, they are members of the individual Scrum teams. They might meet, talk about integration issues. They might talk about communication issues. They might talk about what new information would be useful to make transparent. If they found kind of certain kinds of dependencies that always occur and where it might make sense to figure out if the Nexus could self-organize in a different structure to kind of work around some of those dependencies. But then again, they feed it all back to the Nexus, and then the Nexus itself, all of the developers, all of the brains, all of those people they together figure out kind of what the best solution is. So they're sort of the Scrum Master of the Nexus, but then in team form, if you put it that way. The product owner is part of the Nexus integration team, and hopefully this product owner is a pretty powerful person within the organization. If you have 6 to 9 teams working for you, then you're spending quite a lot of money on a sprint by sprint basis. So if the Nexus integration team comes up with maybe purchasing this tool might be useful, or sending these people in training might be useful, or maybe we can find coaching for this team that might be useful, then hopefully the product owner also has the political power and the budget to make some of those things happen so that we can all improve as a group. So kind of walking through all of Nexus, let's quickly look at what we see. So the kind of people working on the integration team, so they're mostly just team members, but often they're likely going to be senior team members with specific skills around the kinds of integration problems that the Nexus is facing. So if you're having delivery problems, it's probably your DevOps and your tooling people. If it is a test automation or quality kind of in general, then there's probably going to be more focus on quality assurance folks on that group. But if it is the communication between teams or visualizing the work, maybe there's more kind of a group of Scrum Masters that meet together as part of the Nexus integration team. And kind of the composition of that team might change over time. So you've heard lots of it depends, and lots of appropriate people and the right people and the correct time box. So Nexus, just like Scrum, is purposefully incomplete. We've given you enough structure to build on top of, and we haven't told you exactly how to do your thing, because we believe that in an agile environment, there is no one right solution. So you're going to have to figure out what the best solution is for the kinds of problem that you're encountering in your real life. I see, how's that different from other scaling frameworks? It looks a lot like LESS. It looks a lot like Scrum at Scale, but it has some notable differences, especially around the Scrum at Scrums, Nexus Daily Scrum. It's also interesting to kind of look at it from a SAFe perspective. If you really go to Essential SAFe, which is kind of, I think, the very first tab on their website, it looks a lot like Essential SAFe. And I've seen some places where we're doing what we call Nexus under SAFe, where all the teams are basically just doing Scrum, and then management thinks that they're doing doing SAFe, and both are happy in that case. That's a combination that can work quite nicely. So it kind of really depends on where you are coming from and what the kind of problem is that you're at. But if you're doing Scrum, then doing more Scrum is probably a really good way to solve some of the problems and impediments that you are encountering. And that's kind of how Nexus tries to do that. So final big question, what does scaling Scrum solve? I don't think it really solves a problem. It creates the potential for a larger group of people to deliver more value to a single set of customers or within a single product than you can with fewer people. And since we know that Scrum has an optimal team size of around 6 people, a maximum recommended team size of around 10 people, then you can't infinitely just keep adding people to your Scrum team and expect it to function and to be able to deliver value within that context. So at some point, you're going to find that you're going to break up into multiple teams. And if that's 2 teams, then you might not need a scaling framework at all. If that's going to be 3 teams, then you might want to start looking at some of the practices that we recommend in Nexus. Is it 4 or 5 teams? Well, then you're going to probably be using a lot of the features of Nexus and trying to figure out how to kind of integrate those things together. Because otherwise, I'm not sure what adding another team will solve. It will probably not produce more value. It will just create more dependencies, more communication overhead, and will make it harder to deliver anything. So basically, Nexus is trying to solve that problem of how can we effectively add more people without destroying the delivery of value that we rely on. Any follow-up questions? Feel free to unmute, shout out, or put it in the chat. I see some things flying by in the chat. I haven't been able to watch that, so I'm not sure if there's anything that we should kind of.
Oh, it's just jokes. It's just jokes.
Just SAFe-related questions.
It's about your Trojan horse Nexus implementation approach.
Yeah. We need less SAFe.
Yeah, it's not very safe to use safe. It will be less safe for your organization.
Yeah.
Than just Scrum.
So Eric.
Yeah, I'm the two things that you said piqued my interest. First of all, the fact that the three frameworks you mentioned, they are all very similar. Nexus, Scaled Scrum, and the fact that it's all about communication. It's all about giving the people the space they need to coordinate their work. And I have the impression that if we accept that implementing Scrum is already a huge challenge, my hypothesis is that if you reach the point where you have mature Scrum teams who have gained the trust in an organization and the space the trust they need to act as professionals, then I feel that they should be able to do that coordination on their own without a framework. I feel that in general, scaling frameworks, they seem to try to offer a solution similar to Scrum, in the sense that Scrum it gives people a framework to learn how to be agile. And I think that it's such a huge undertaking to take the next step towards scaling. How could you expect to be able to offer a framework that captures all that complexity? And isn't it wiser to trust in the developed maturity of the teams and trust them to figure out the scaling on their own? Right.
So basically, you described Nexus.
Yes. I thought you'd say that.
We have figured out in many places where we worked with scaling some of the problems and some of the pitfalls that people fall into. So we're giving basically minimal guidance on where we expect you to have problems. Yeah. And we provide some suggestions on how you might solve them, which are not very concrete. And we trust in the team to be able to figure out what works best for the team. And we always bring it back to the team. So in the retrospective, we bring it back to the teams. In the sprint review, we bring it back to the teams. In the Nexus sprint planning, we keep bringing it back to the team. So this is not something that tries to solve scaling at a higher level in the organization. We try not to add a gazillion hierarchies and other things. We're trying to keep things simple and to create an environment where that learning and that continuous experimentation that caused one team to be able to deliver Scrum effectively can now work with multiple teams, keep learning and keep delivering Scrum and value effectively. So yeah, wonderful explanation, Eric, of kind of taking it from another approach, but I'd say that was a good explanation of Nexus.
Thanks.
Maybe
I'm not going to talk about any other scaling frameworks, but they might be more opinionated about how you should scale. And I have an opinion about that, but that's not what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Eric, maybe one thing to point out is, like, as you mentioned, thinking about accountabilities. So if you have a product team, agile product team, so then Scrum says, okay, think about, you need at least 3 accountabilities to ensure that long-term success. You need somebody who thinks about value and so on. Yeah. And now if we scale, we say, hold on, think up, you need 1 more accountability. This should not fall short, otherwise you run into trouble. And that's integration. So it will not magically happen that the work gets automatically integrated. Maybe that's true in your environment, but if not, who takes care of it? Yeah. That's the integration team. Just watch out. That's it.
Yeah, my question is inspired by I'm not sure if you're aware about the concept of fluid teams. It's quite popular at the moment in
Netherlands.
Yeah, I'm also in serious Scrum, so I know the guy who's writing about it. But what I find so intriguing about that approach is that it's really based on trust. And in my own experience as a Scrum Master, I've noticed that the agile mindset, as soon as you get that going, it's so amazing what you can achieve. And I've done it myself. I've had teams who scale out of necessity without any kind of support, simply because they have that mindset.
So one of the interesting things that that you might also be referring to is, so we have got the teams in the Nexus, but unlike Scrum teams where we kind of give the guidance that your team should remain constant in order to remain predictable, since we're in a context of a product, a big product, a Nexus, and we have shared goals, we've got a shared vision, and we are working together, you can fluently move between teams if the work requires so. So if you see that your dependencies are changing, I've been at a bank where we were like a savings group and a mortgages group and a finance group and an insurance group. And then suddenly the work changed from these individual silos of functionality into, let's figure out if we can cross-sell and upsell. If somebody has got too much money in their savings account, let's suggest what kind of investments they can do. And so suddenly all of these functionalities, they were cross the silos, and it didn't make any sense to keep the original teams together because that would maximize the dependencies. So in that case, the team started to reorganize around these new dependencies, but we kept the same people within the Nexus because that still made sense. And people were able to move around because the context remained the same. So basically, it's just assuming a slightly different kind of function within a team.
Oh, that's brilliant. I wasn't aware of that.
That's a good segue for the next thing, Nexi.
Guys, we have one more question from Kalina. How do you decide between Scrum of Scrums and Nexus? Is it just the number of teams?
Okay, an easy answer would be like, to me, Scrum of Scrum is a meeting where Nexus is a scaling framework.
Yeah, I'm okay with your Scrum of Scrums as long as it happens before your daily Scrum.
And so typically we refer to Scrum of Scrum as this kind of meeting which helps coordinate between Scrum teams, and where we typically send Scrum Master to, if they have problems within teams, to escalate those problems. That's a different thing, as the Nexus framework is a scaling framework, and the Nexus Daily Scrum is about removing dependencies and issues between teams.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, talked about shared goals. And the next thing would be, you see a couple of yellow stickies or dots, and you see 4 questions: product goal, Nexus goal, something else, and sprint goal. So think about your current situation you're working with.
Your current team,
yeah.
coaching, team that you're part of, product that you're working for.
Yeah. Do you have a product goal? If so, please move a yellow dot to it. If you have a sprint goal, if so, please move a dot to the quadrant. If you have an overarching goal for teams like a Nexus goal, please move a dot. And if you say, oh, hold on, we have something different, then move for something else a dot. That we get a short overview where you are at the moment.
Yeah. We're doing.
Okay, we have one Nexus goal.
We're doing objective key results metrics with the flavor of vanilla sauce, right? So
yeah, on fluid teams.
Are,
a safe environment.
Are there any more hashtags you could add, guys?
Yeah. Okay, we have 4 product goals, and we have a couple of sprint goals, and we have some person who has a Nexus goal and something else.
And it's interesting to see that we've got like 20 people on the call, and we've got 6 sprint goals. So that means that quite a few teams have no sprint goals at all, which would also be kind of interesting to figure that one out. How many kind of haven't moved their post yet? But yeah, goal setting is difficult, especially in many organizations.
Yes.
So but they are very powerful. So if we kind of continue onwards, then in Scrum, in the Scrum Guide 2020, we introduced the concept of a product goal. And a sprint goal is a step towards the product goal. But assuming that we've got one big product goal, then you'd assume that the collective of teams working on the same product would also collectively make a big step towards the product goal. But they're not all necessarily following the same sprint goal. So what is the step that they're making? Are they all just kind of finding their own way, or is there some overarching thing that they're working together on? What would happen if you have 6 individual sprint goals, but not something overarching? What would happen if you just had a single goal and each team doesn't really define how they're going to contribute to it? So that's kind of the reason why Nexus introduced this concept of a Nexus goal. It is kind of the collective bigger step towards the product goal, and it helps guide the teams to figure out what the kind of work it is that they want to deliver and contribute for that sprint. So all of these things, they go together. In Scrum, you've of course seen the Scrum value commitment and focus, and both, of course, apply to many of the goals. So a goal in itself provides focus, and a team that believes that they can deliver what the goal is trying to accomplish, they can commit to that. And if there is no clear goal, then what are you committing to? Is it just a random bunch of work? And committing to a random bunch of work just generally just doesn't feel that nice. So but that also might mean that you have to do something that isn't necessarily the thing that your team is best at. That might actually require some courage. So if you look at all of these things, the Scrum values are also kind of tied in strongly to these different goals and how to bring things together. Here you can see 4 cross-team refinement boards for different teams. So Simon, can you pull everybody in? Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Here you can see 4 different cross-team refinement boards, and they're all good. They're all right in their own way. So teams might have something like this, and what you're seeing is basically a pink feature, a blue feature, and a red feature, and a couple of other work that's happening. And you can see different modes of collaboration happening in these 4 different quadrants. In the most upper right corner, so this one, you'll see that that all of the teams are working very closely together on a single feature. Here you can see that a single team is specialist working on a specific feature. Here you see the same thing, but they're sort of more spread out. So instead of kind of really closely working together on that one feature, this is maybe a little bit more risk-averse team that doesn't want to start working on something before they know really that something's done and they've gotten their feedback. While here, they're a little bit more daring, maybe. And in the upper right corner, you're seeing a bunch of teams that have all kinds of dependencies on each other. So this is not really a cross. It's not really a feature team, but it's sort of a combination between all of these. And probably, if you have to ask me, probably the worst of the situation. It's we've got dependency with any other team, and we don't really dare to take dependencies into the same sprint. So we've got lots of dependencies that we have to coordinate, and they take a long time. And probably because of that, we're also talking about not just these 3, but likely 12 features being in progress and having dependencies on each other and all of that. If you kind of would figure out what all the other orange post-its would be or could represent. So where do you think that you are right now, and where would you like to be? So can you add a post-it on the place that you think represents your team?
Oh, I can grab a couple of.
I see an unhappy visiting thinker. Is that you, Simon?
No.
I think that this right bottom corner have the variation where there is dependency between this feature, this pink and blue features. So I have such situation, but with dependencies between teams.
Okay.
So I see a bunch of people in the feature team area.
We have
team area.
We have teams who work on some features, like one feature team, but they have these dependencies between teams.
Okay.
So these are sort of extremes, right? So you might be somewhere in the middle. if you think about sprint goals and about Nexus goals, which quadrant do you think has the strongest kind of shared direction that these teams are working on?
But that's a tricky question. Because in the top right quadrant, because the teams are sharing features, it would suggest that they also share the most with each other. But I feel that the bottom right quadrant is far more interesting because you have the independence between the teams, and still you can have coordination and a shared vision.
Yeah, so I think we can agree that the items on the right are more favorable than the items on the left. And interestingly enough, many scaling practitioners are looking at how to create feature teams that can independently work off each other. But that creates small silos of agile pockets inside of your organization. But what if you then had to make a really big change that required basically a lot of people? You've created all of these silos, and I've literally seen people say, no, I can't help out with that because that's not what our team does. It's like, well, but that's the most important thing that should happen inside of the company right now. Yeah, but we don't know how to work together with that other team because we never do that. So it really depends on kind of what position you are in as a company. If you've got a kind of an established product with many different feature areas, you could probably keep all of these feature teams busy. But then some pandemic comes around and you have to kind of rethink your product. And some companies were able to kind of pull together a lot of people and have them effectively work together and completely revamp their products. Other companies completely fell apart. So it's kind of really interesting to kind of look at that. It's also that if you look at the time it takes to get feedback, upper right quadrant, I can get full feedback on a whole feature in half a sprint. It will take me 1.5 sprints in the lower right corner. So my time to learn is much less. My opportunity to experiment is much higher. So there are some really interesting kind of aspects to the upper right corner as well. I'm not saying that you should always be there, but we are saying that if you do have the need for a larger goal, and your teams are capable of collectively working on such a goal, you'll probably be able to make much larger steps toward that big product goal than when you're trying to basically chase 3 different product goals across 3 different feature teams. And then hopefully you could have the luck that those 3 feature teams could actually be moving towards the same collective product goal, but each at their own pace and each in their own area of the product. There is a lot of power in getting the whole of a nexus to be able to contribute. Because in the lower right corner, if there's no dependencies between feature teams, that's just 3 times Scrum. They don't need a scaling framework, right? Yeah. Which is also, what kind of problem is scaling trying to solve? Well, we're trying to create an environment where the upper right corner is possible. You might not have to leverage it all the time, but if you can, it's wonderful. And if you can actually spend a lot of time in the lower right corner, where you can effectively build feature by feature, when the water is a little bit calmer and your customers aren't going crazy, by all means, be there, because it's a lot easier. You've got fewer dependencies, much less to coordinate, and it's going to save from the brain of the teams. Again, try to find the simplest structure that solves your problem, and having those nice separated silos is a wonderful place to be because it creates a lot of calm and simplicity. But that's just 3 times Scrum. The upper right corner is 3 teams collectively working on a single goal, on a single thing at the same time. And that's where you might need something like a scaling framework. Now, unfortunately, most people that I encounter are in the upper left corner. They have no idea together. They've got loads of dependencies, and they're trying to use a scaling framework to solve it. And the only thing that Nexus and Safe and Less will do is make transparent that you are in hell.
Yeah.
And that the scaling framework is not going to solve it. And that's the same as in Scrum. If you have a non-cross-functional team in an environment that's completely waterfall driven with terrible deadlines, Scrum is not going to solve your problem. It's just going to show You have terrible deadlines. You don't know how to release often. You don't get enough feedback. Your people don't know how to work together. But Scrum itself isn't solving that. It's just going to make that awfully transparent, and then you can do something about that. So the same happens in the upper left corner. Is if you're doing cross-team refinement and you make the work visible and you end up with a bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. Literally, if you're doing safe planning with like red yarn and post-its, you can get a 1,000 red yarns on a big wall. And then you stand back and you look at it and go like, wonderful, we've made all of that visible. And then you don't do anything with that. Then there is no use, right? You then have to figure out how can we reduce the number of spaghetti, and how can we actually make this thing simpler. Simplicity is the thing that will help you here. All right, so that was rule number 1. A simple framework. And then we go to the rule of 1. So I'm passing it off to Simon again.
Yeah. Question as before. Do you see a grid? Hold on, I get everybody to us. You see a grid. I will copy and paste a couple of dots. Please indicate where you are located. You see the number of teams on one axis, and the other axis, you see the number of product owners. What's your current situation? So how many teams do you have? How many product owners are around?
Yeah, maybe the third dimension. How many actual products do you have? Because
yeah, there was the one which looks outwards. Okay. So we have a number of teams and a number of product owners. Now
Yeah,
the remaining question is one product.
That's what we were expecting. It's rare that you have a team that has 6 product owners. I see it once in a while, but
But you know, that is the kind of stuff you cannot unsee once you've seen it, right?
yeah, those discussions are also really nice. So we're all locked to you, Simon. So when you move, we all move.
I'm sorry. So I don't move anymore.
Nice.
Okay. So we advocate a little bit for the rule of 1. Like if you have one product, you should have one product owner, one product backlog. That's the rule of 1. And in sake of time, we do not have that much time, but we would like to talk a little bit what's the reasoning behind it and what it will cause us if we violate that rule. Am I allowed to move now, Jesse?
Yep, you can move.
Okay. And here we have a situation. We don't want to go too much in detail. We provided you a link to a blog post and also a video which animates that situation quite nicely. But assume the situation, you have one product, but you have multiple product owners and multiple teams. And what you typically then encounter that, okay, if I have developers and I'm a product owner, of course I need a product backlog. I'm a product owner. And then we have multiple product backlog as well. And what we are creating here is a lot of additional complexity. So think of what's now the most important thing if you have, I don't know, 5 product backlogs. Okay, that's one question. And we can draw a lot of errors between those product backlogs, which in turn create now a lot of additional dependencies within our work. And the simplest, yes, he's doing it.
More nightmares. There's your
More
spaghetti.
nightmares. Yes.
All right.
And what we end up is, if you still have one product, so it's what we see in practice or in with the clients, that we end up more on team ownership and less on product ownership. So it's very hard for those individual product owners to maximize the overall value of the whole product. And this also decreases transparency a lot, because if you think you are a stakeholder of that product and you want to know what's the future of the product, who is the single person now you can talk to who has the ultimate answer? Now, if you have 5 product owners, to whom do I talk now? And that's one thing why we emphasize there should be only one product owner in order to create transparency. So the product owner somehow creates transparency around the possible future of the product. So if I have a question regarding the future of the product, there's one person I can ask who can give me an answer. And so a lot of product owners make it even more difficult to maximize value, create a lot of additional dependencies between the people, and the decision making gets much, much harder. And also we have additional product backlog. It's not clear what is the most important thing here anymore. And in order
What is difficult in that situation is that those people, those product owners that I just put a red cross through, like, you're no longer working for us, and that's not true. Those people were actually adding a lot of value to those teams. They were probably providing a good service to the team as well, but Scrum just doesn't call them product owner. And then the question becomes, what are they? Are they just simply a developer on the developer team, on the team that they're working on, their Scrum team? Because that might be true. It could be that some of these, instead of being a developer, they might be a stakeholder of the product owner, and they don't actually interface directly with the team, and that's also a possible solution. Yeah. Kind of the question is, how do we solve this? And the most difficult piece I find here is that once you give somebody the internal function title inside of an organization and tell them you are now a product owner and you get a pay raise, telling them that you are no longer a product owner, you can keep your pay raise, but we're going to call you just developer again, just doesn't feel right. So a lot of those people are likely going to leave the company, or at least be quite angry. And that's not what you're trying to accomplish here, but it's often kind of how this is perceived. So it's really important to, if you're in this situation and you start to reduce the number of product backlogs, not to start introducing something like a chief product owner or a chief product owner, or as I call them, the C3POs. It just doesn't work. You're creating more hierarchy, you're creating more discussion, you're creating more room for assumptions and failures, and there's more time between decision making. And we don't want that in an agile environment. So basically, we want to have that one product owner that delegates some of their work to the individual teams. But at the same time, those people were probably already doing quite a lot of that work, and they were doing it on a delegated basis. They are valuable. We still love them. It's just that we made a mistake in the way that we scaled up inside of the organization, and we need to fix that. We don't need to fix that by removing those people. We need to fix that by clarifying what their purpose is.
Then the question comes to mind, how does one product owner now work with so many teams? And that's the last thing we would like to touch on. So the first thing we saw before, goal setting has a large influence on the success of the product. In the exercise before, we had a look how powerful it is to set a overarching team goal like a Nexus goal. And basically, you need only one product owner to set these kind of goals. Based on that, we can also think of establishing a solid vision. And a solid vision does not mean write something down on a wall. It's about communicating that vision. Make sure that the developers within the team have a solid understanding why we are here.
Yeah, and also just make sure that you keep doing that. I have clients that say, our vision is this, and then sales comes in as, I just sold something that's not in line with the vision, but they're paying a lot of money. Go do the work. And it's like, no, we had a vision. Like the team and the company should also be kind of bought into that vision. It's not just something that you put on a board and talk about and then ignore when it's convenient. It's actually kind of the thing that you live for.
And as a product owner working with multiple teams, you're still accountable for maximizing the value, but the methods how you do it maybe need a little bit changed. And you're delegating a little bit more. You try to connect the teams with users or stakeholder. It does not go anything through your hands. It's more about connecting people and help them to figure it out. Maybe you provide some additional metrics to see that progress is made in specific areas which are of value to the product. And move a little bit away from the tactical stuff, focus more on the strategic side of things. That's how we think product ownership should be scaled. And also think about new ways. So with automating everything in terms of development, we can also automate some parts of product ownership. And we think here like building experimentation into your product, like help the teams to run A/B tests and figure out what provides most value to the customer. So if we have two competing features, why the product owner does not decide which one should be or is more important? The user decides which is more usable, more helpful to the user. Why do we need a product owner here? That's something we can build into the system or in the product as well, and the team can act on it and make their decision based on data, not on opinion.
And then we can present that at sprint review, and then the product owner goes, well, based on the data, you made a great decision, and then just continue. Right? If the product owner goes in and actually makes a decision before the work actually happens, it's make this, and then you present it at sprint review. So this is what we built. These are the results that we have. We have no idea what it compares to because we never built the alternative. So it's the best that we could come up with, and now we'll wait for feedback, right? So it's a different kind of approach. So you're also building experimentation into the creation of the product, basically become more agile.
Yes. And then the last thing we want to talk about, do not always think about scaling up. Sometimes you can increase the value of the products by descaling or breaking your product into smaller products. Okay, maybe if you reach the number 9, the magic number 9 of teams, before you add a 10th team, maybe there's an alternative. Maybe you can divide it in sub-products to remain small and nimble. This also applies for 3 teams or 2 teams or so on. Always rethink, do we really need to scale up, or is there a way to scale down or to break the product down? Then of course you can have again 2 product owners. So that's a good side note.
Yeah. And when you do that, the tendency in many places is to create a front-end team and a back-end team and a services team and a database team. Don't do that, because that maximizes the dependencies between teams and puts you back into hell, which is not where you want to be. Yeah. So that's just something to keep in mind there. If you want to know more about this, Don is actually going to have a call on Thursday, tomorrow. And he is actually just going to spend his whole 1.5 hours to dive deeper into what it means to scale the product owner role, kind of completely disconnected of the scaling framework. So we kind of linked it here a little bit to Nexus, but he'll just do a scaling agnostic version. And you can click on the register now button, and it will bring you to the back to the AgileUkraine website. You can subscribe there. And it gives you kind of another opportunity for wonderful more information on Scrum in general, on the product owner role, and maybe just set forward this to your product owner. If your product owner is in this environment, you are a Scrum Master, is like, I heard some good things tonight. My product owner should really know more about that. Then Don is just going to go all into evidence-based management and the product owner role and experimentation, and as much as you can think about. So a wonderful kind of segue into tomorrow.
Cool.
I guess I broke the register link, so maybe we need to provide another one in the chat.
All right. So that puts us at the end for today. We'll hang around for a few more questions, but we really appreciate you all being here. And don't forget to donate. Yes. And then keep visiting every night, and then you'll just learn a lot more about what's happening, but also be able to kind of get first-hand experience and first-hand kind of knowledge about what's happening elsewhere in Europe, and what you can help and how you can contribute. So, Andrei, we're just kind of passing it back to you. Okay. We are done for tonight. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much, Jesse and Simon. It
It was cool. It was awesome. I've received a couple of messages saying that it was very valuable.
It was from me.
Not only.
Great workshop, great talks. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you have guys any questions, it's the right time.
While you're thinking about questions, I want to provide short feedback. So thank you for the slide with experimentation. It's really awesome. I quite often explain it to my clients on trainings, but visualize it should help to understand it people better. So it was really awesome for me. It's one of the action item to update my materials in my trainings. And also thank you for referring on MJ from Seattle with this why Scrum is not making your teams agile about one product owner and principle of one rule. So for those who've missed, there were a link on the source of this material. There is a very nice YouTube video, just 9 minutes, but very funny about this conception. I will share also in chat for those who.
Right?
Huh?
Put it in the show notes.
Yeah. So thanks. And please ask your questions. Alona, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, I do have a question. So the question is about the last part. Guys, thank you for the whole talk, but the third part was like the most
Which
touching
one?
for me. So the question is the following. If we go to the slide about the descaling, right? And yet at the same time, so imagine we have a product, Simon and I have talked about it a little bit, and then we sort of break it into the subproduct, and yet there is a recommendation of rule of one, right? Where there would be like a single product owner. Does that mean that, well, if we break it into the subproducts and there is like a product owner for the subproducts, and then there is like a chief product owner for these product owners of subfolders, or I'm at the loss here. Can you help?
Yeah, there could be. It depends. Our recommendation is not to, because otherwise you've split and you've just kept the old reason. But it also kind of, if you go back to the sprint goal slide, you kind of here, you might just end up in this situation where you have where each team is working on their own product, but they don't have any dependencies and you're just doing Scrum, which means that each product evolves on their own, and that's okay. Maybe these product owners do communicate once in a while with each other. They're also humans, so they're allowed to speak to each other. But each has their own ownership and they can evolve each part of the product in the same way. If these things are still tightly coupled and they need to be this, they look the same, they need to feel the same, they need to deploy at the same time, they need to be integrated into the same app, then you're likely more in this environment where we need these teams to actually integrate their work together and deliver something that's more cohesive and more coherent. And in that case, I wouldn't recommend on adding a layer of product owners, but then we would just have one product owner and have teams that are more bound to a certain area of the product than others, but still are able to work together. So try to hold off on adding layers of product owners until the last responsible moment. And when that is, might be at 6, it might be at 9, it might be at 18. I don't know, right? It's also really depending on your product owner and the way they communicate with their teams. If they're really capable of talking in values and goals and vision and strategy, and kind of refrain from maintaining the product backlog themselves, it's easier. But if they are a little bit meddlesome, then it becomes a problem quite quickly, and they won't be able to scale as much. So you're likely going to have to split the product earlier in that case, or find a better product owner, which might also be an option. I'm not sure which one's the best in your case. But,
which is why tomorrow's talk is going to be vital. Thank you, guys.
I have a quick question. So I think there's a lot of experienced people here who implemented such Nexus or less frameworks within organizations. What was about the, well, obviously it depends a little bit on the organization and the teams, but what is about the lead time you would have on making a change, such drastic change, I think, in an organization? Or what were the challenges? Let me put it that way.
No?
No, I would like.
Go ahead, Simon.
I would say it depends so much on the product and in sense of how legacy your product. So from the technology side. So I had two experience, and one was we worked with a very old product, like it was 20 years old or something. So it's the typical mainframe example. And whatever you do, it's just more or less lipstick on the surface. It took at least 1 year to see any notable difference in order to change something. But then on the other hand, I had another experience which was more modern. So we were around, when I started with 1 or 2 teams, and then they scaled up to 4, and the application was quite modern. It was not older than a year. And scaling was pretty easy because it was somehow baked into the product. As I said, it was microservice and everything was highly decoupled. So it was quite easy to scale and to split later in 2 smaller products with 1 and 2 teams. There was not a big deal. So yeah, let's do it. It was more like that. And that's a thing which is kind of hard to give a.
I also think it's very dependent on the people that you already have. So exactly. In many cases, it's a change of focus in the organization. So it's a new project or a new endeavor, and then people are reallocated to there, and then you can slowly grow, and then you can grow as fast as you want and as you can. But I've also seen situations where there's a product and we were working in a more or less waterfall fashion. There were 200 people working on it, and then somebody said, from now on, we're going to do something scaly scrummy. But then you already have 200 people, and you're probably, if you kind of look at this graph, you're probably somewhere down here. Yeah. So you don't want to learn how to scale this back up. You want to figure out where can we add a lot of value with 150 fewer people, and then not to fire those people, but to actually give those other people also meaningful work, and therefore maybe triple or quadruple the amount of value that you create within the whole organization. That's going to be ideal. But it's very difficult if you are here. The thing that you need to learn is which teams should we let go of, and that's not something that Nexus helps you with. But that's a completely different kind of scaling environment than kind of the example that Simon just gave. But if you have like 200 existing people, probably the ideal scale is less than that, and the maximum number of people that you can kind of have within a Nexus is way lower than that. Kind of we don't recommend you to go beyond 90. So this would probably also be what we call Nexus Plus, which would be kind of multiple Nexi integrating together, which we don't even have a picture of because it's different in every organization that you try it. So then that's kind of a very different kind of picture. If you are there, you might go really quick. So Ken and Jeff's original FBI case study, which you can read about in the Software in 30 Days book, and they explained that they kind of went from a product for the FBI, which is also even a government product, where they had 450 people working on it, and then Ken and Jeff joined, and then they reduced scale to 45, and with 45 people, they were able to deliver more value per sprint than they were able with 450 people. But they descaled quite rapidly, and then started to figure out kind of what's the maximum number of people that we can add, while just keeping the other people sort of busy. And then they figured out, like, all right, so this is the maximum size that we can use. Now we need to figure out what to do with the other 400 people.
That's where the courage comes in, right?
Yeah.
So,
and this requires some massive management buy-in, and sometimes even like that unions might start to interfere with this, because you're potentially talking about the livelihood of 400 people, because in many companies they're not finding other valuable things for these people to do. They're finding other cheaper places for these people to be, and that's not kind of the human way that we want to approach things in Scrum.
Maybe yes, it is also something what we could point out here. Like if the only metric is the number of people, then you have a problem.
Yeah.
So it's the only metric for success, how many people are working or how many costs they produce, then you have a problem. And that's something before you even scale or no matter when you decide to change something, start measuring. Otherwise, you will never come in this kind of experimentation loop. So if you add a couple of more teams, what's changing? If you remove teams, what is changing? And that's, I would say, that's the most crucial step, which, to be honest, with every company I worked in my life, never did. So how do you measure? Yeah, we measure the number of people and the costs. Yeah, okay, what? So, okay, there's only one way up or down. I don't know, but that's such a huge problem. And when I then introduced like lead time and cycle time measurements, and then if you add teams or remove teams, and then you see some changes on the cycle time, okay, now you are talking. But before it made no sense at all. And that's the crucial step, and which you should help your companies to understand, hopefully.
All right. So final question.
Yeah.
Eric.
Last one.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Simon just said, and I've had experience with startups where scaling is ideal. Experiment, get inspired by different frameworks, and it's just basically fun. And then you have the big organizations that have the budgets to hire all these consultancy companies to scale. And my experience is extremely negative. I mean, you're fighting against entrenched culture, hierarchies, which I mean, we're talking about 50% of the company, which is basically useless management. And I personally have the feeling that it's pretty much of a hopeless cause. But maybe I'm being too cynical. What is your opinion on that?
Ken, I'll ask these kinds of people, are you really willing to change and are you desperate? If not, call me again in a year when you are desperate. And that might actually be useful because you need that sense of urgency to really change something.
Yes.
So if people really want to change, then that happens. My neighbor works in a startup, and and he knows I'm a consultant. He says, "We'll never hire you." Why? So, well, because you're relatively expensive, and money is not our problem. Like, as long as we've got investors that are willing to invest in the product, then we've got money like water. The problem that we have is actually binding really good people to our cause. So why would we hire an external person that is not that's never really committed to the cause, because they can step out at any point in time? So why would you hire a consultancy to come and tell you how to change your organization if your own people don't feel the urgency to make the change from the inside out? So if everybody is asking, can please join our team because we really need to be shaken up, that's ideal. If people want you to be there because they've taken a class from you, if they've seen you work at another company and they say, that thing that you did there, that was awesome, we also need some butt kicking, and that's what they request you to come and do, that's perfect. But management just hiring people to change the people that these managers are unable to change themselves is not going to solve a problem. Or at least it's going to take a long time. It's going to be relatively painful. So it's also why you see many organizations spin off startups. Looking at ING Netherlands, for example, they've spun up quite a few startups to learn how to be agile, and then started moving their great people over into those startups. Because you can start afresh, you can start with a new thing, and if it doesn't succeed, then you just kill the startup. You hire those people back into your original company as if nothing has changed. So it's kind of relatively risk-free, or at least less risky than changing the thing that you're earning all of your money from. But yeah, scaling isn't easy. We never said it was going to be easy. We said you should try to keep it simple. So, and as long as you keep it simple, it might be easier. That's
a topic for our next talk.
Looking forward to it.
Free scaling.
All right, folks.
All right.
Right. So thank you very much, guys, and thank you very much for every participant to be here. So to be honest, I have rested today. It was so smooth, so good. So thank you guys. Thanks a
No
lot.
moderation, no facilitation.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Awesome.
It was awesome. It was awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah, so we both take a rest today. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks a lot. Stay tuned with us. Remember to donate, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye.
Top record.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.